I was initially inspired to make this film because of John F. Kennedy's idealism. And that's one of the things that inspired me to go to the Peace Corps after college. And I've always kind of wanted to know more about who he was as an individual.
We uncovered a series of episodes that have been in plain sight for decades, but are largely unknown to the American public, that we feel personify an effort to mitigate conflict, to avoid armed conflict. Things like his willingness to have a dialogue with Fidel Castro, his attempt to get out of Vietnam before it became the Vietnam War, his effort to use intermediaries who weren't necessarily in the State Department or in some other government body to communicate to foreign dignitaries, including Nikita Khrushchev. And if you look at those episodes reveal patterns in his behavior. If people have the opportunity to be exposed to those things, they will see a different picture than the one that is prevalent in the media today.
A Buddhist philosopher and educator from Japan who has inspired me in many ways, his name is Daisaku Ikeda, had written about John F. Kennedy.
His emphasis on how a single individual can change the destiny of humankind is sort of a through line for us. JFK represented that kind of hope. He, as an individual, he had a profound effect. Examining that hope and trying to figure out what was real about it and to bring that to life, to not only celebrate what there was to celebrate there, but to expose it to new generations is something we wanted to do. But of course, as documentarians, we had to go do the work and actually do the research and figure out, okay, well, we know, so we're predisposed to be inspired by this, so we need to be cautious and measured in our research. The possibility of nuclear war was really extreme in the early 1960s. What we saw was a president who took enormous political risk to pursue an agenda that avoided armed conflict. Many of the advisors, many of the people in the US government at the time, people who came from the Eisenhower administration, from the Truman administration, the generals who won the Second World War, these people were highly influential. When Kennedy came into office, he relied on the advice of some of these people. These were luminaries who had played significant roles in the Second World War, whereas Kennedy had only been a lieutenant junior grade during the Second World War. Well, in the Bay of Pigs, he found out that he had to be more discerning in whose advice he was going to follow, that people weren't necessarily going to tell him everything that he needed to do or that he needed to know. It's very easy for people to make caricatures out of the military leaders who were opposing JFK during his presidency, such as General Curtis LeMay. Curtis LeMay, during the Second World War, was charged with the task of leading the bomber groups that were attacking Nazi Germany. And Curtis LeMay understood prior to the war that the United States had not properly prepared for the eventuality of a world war. And as a consequence, when he was assigned to the task of leading the bomber squadrons, he had to knowingly send thousands of men to their deaths. So you could see the reason why a person like Curtis LeMay would develop an attitude that we're not going to allow this to happen again. Kennedy came into office with this sort of established Cold War mentality that was already prevalent in the government at the time, and he had to find a way to avoid nuclear war.
Especially during the beginning of Kennedy's relationship with Khrushchev, he believed that Khrushchev was totally unpredictable, that there was a very real and distinct possibility that Khrushchev could have started a nuclear war. From that point, Kennedy could have just given up and started preparing for war. Instead, what I saw was that he didn't give up on Khrushchev as a person, as a human being.
Kennedy's greatest weapon was dialogue, was his ability to speak to his adversaries and to put himself in the shoes of his adversaries, and this was a strength.
He still believed that maybe there was something in this man that was empathetic towards other human beings.
I think the two of them shared a knowingness, an understanding that's remarkable, and I imagine that continues today among world leaders.
It's a great example of how important it is to never give up on efforts to resolve a problem without having to go to war. There were many obstacles in making this film, but one of the biggest, I would say, was getting a hold of and getting the okay to interview the right people.
We had to ask ourselves, who's still going to be around and who can we go after? So, for instance, in the case of the Vienna Summit, there were times during the Vienna Summit when there were only 4 people in the room, and those 4 people were JFK, Khrushchev, Khrushchev's interpreter, and Kennedy's interpreter. So we thought, okay, well, maybe these guys are still alive. And as it turned out, Viktor Sukhadrev is still alive and lives in Moscow. And Alex Akalovsky, who was JFK's interpreter, lives outside of Washington, D.C. These guys were in the room. They were actually not only witnessing history, they were participating in it. So they told wonderful stories, many that made the film, many that didn't make the film. Of course, they also have the benefit of hindsight, that 50 years later they can look back and assess those meetings that they had in a different way.
Khrushchev kept saying that the decision to conclude a peace treaty with East Germany was irrevocable. It will happen. Nobody could stop him. Nobody in the world. That's his words. How the president took it, he turned to me and he asked me, said, "Alex, is he always like that?"
The history of the Vienna Summit was something that we spent a long time investigating. And I was very happy that we were able to pull the pieces together that we did. I've never seen a film that has both Akalovsky and Sukhadrev sharing their stories about first-hand stories about the Vienna Summit. The footage and the photographs are quite remarkable, and it's a remarkable moment in history. It's a remarkable moment in Kennedy's presidency.
In short, while we are ready to defend our interests, we shall also be ready to search for peace.
We were very fortunate to have a team of researchers looking for material. Though I can't say that we were able to utilize everything that we wanted to get our hands on, we were able to find a number of things that were quite surprising. One day I was looking through the bins and I came upon this clip of Kennedy as a senator talking about how if the United States were to get involved in Vietnam, that it was not going to amount to anything good.
I therefore believe that before the United States moves in any degree, that independence must be granted to the people, that the people must support the struggle, because unless, as I said, that support is forthcoming, any intervention by the United States is bound to be futile.
It plays a significant role in demonstrating how this awareness of the situation in Vietnam for Kennedy predated his presidency.
I do believe that Kennedy would have done everything in his power to keep us out of Vietnam, or to have done everything he could to make our engagement in Vietnam very limited.
The idea that Kennedy was actually pursuing some kind of negotiations with North Vietnam is really important. Can you imagine the possibilities of how that conflict might have been different?
Let us never negotiate out of fear, but let us never fear to negotiate.
It seems every year in world politics we have new conflicts, new potentialities for war. I think it's very important that we reflect on the importance of dialogue, and for us to be able to continue to dialogue with people regardless of whether or not they are on the other side of an ideological divide.
Our problems are man-made, therefore they can be solved by man.
In his American University speech, he said that peace is impossible, that it's like a dream. And he said that that's a defeatist perspective.
It would be nice if our film can have an impact and suggest the possibilities of dialogue and how that can bring about change in the world today. We can talk about world decisions in platitudes and their political significance, but when it comes to armed conflict and the potential for killing people, Kennedy seemed to have this ability to recognize the value of a single human being. And I think that we can learn from that.